Heir versus spare, the royal sibling rivalry that shapes a nation. The modern dilemma. There is a uniquely modern path for a royal spare: scandal without power. Prince Andrew, Queen Elizabeth II's second son, has become the poster child for this. Once second in line to the throne, his association with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein led to him being stripped of his titles and public duties. He represents the reputational damage a spare can inflict on the family without ever wearing the crown. A constant headache for the heir, his brother, King Charles III. The scandals have cast a long shadow, forcing the monarchy to take decisive action to protect the institution. But what happens when the rivalry isn't one of scandal, but of schism? The bond between brothers can be stronger than anything. But what happens when one is born to be king and the other is born to be the spare? For centuries, the line of succession has also been a line of fire. From betrayal and abdication to quiet loyalty and tragic exile, the relationship between the heir and the spare has the power to shape history. The role of the spare is a paradox, a life of incredible privilege, yet one defined by what you are not. Your plan B, a substitute waiting in the wings for a tragedy that no one wants. This tension has robbed many of a sense of purpose, fueling a mix of rage and resentment that has, more than once, threatened to topple the crown itself. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the intense pressures and historical rivalries of royal second sons, revealing how their choices, from loyalty to rebellion, have both made and broken the monarchy. Part 1. The Reluctant King, George VI and Edward VIII. No story shows the brutal whiplash of the spare's fate better than that of Prince Albert, the man the world would come to know as King George VI. Born the second son of King George V, Bertie lived his life in the shadow of his older brother, David, the future King Edward VIII. David was everything Bertie was not: charismatic, confident, and a celebrated modern heir. Bertie was shy and plagued by a debilitating stammer that made public life agony. He was never supposed to be king, and he wanted no part of it. He served in the Royal Navy and hoped for a quiet family life. But his brother David was on a collision course with the crown. As King Edward VIII, his reign was short and scandalous. His determination to marry Wallis Simpson, an American socialite divorcing her second husband, was unthinkable to the establishment. The Church of England, which the monarch heads, forbade remarrying if a former spouse was still living. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin gave the king an ultimatum: give up Mrs. Simpson or give up the throne. For Edward, who had little sense of royal duty, the choice was simple. On December 10, 1936, he signed the abdication papers, witnessed by his 3 younger brothers. The next day, he explained in a radio address that he couldn't be king without the help and support of the woman I love. The crown he threw away landed squarely on the head of his terrified younger brother. When Bertie learned his brother's final decision, he reportedly broke down and sobbed like a child. He was completely unprepared. But this reluctant spare, thrust into a role he never wanted, would go on to save the monarchy. Taking the name George VI to honour his respected father, he dedicated himself to the job. His greatest test came during World War II. While other European leaders fled their capitals, King George VI and his wife, Queen Elizabeth, stayed in Buckingham Palace, even as it was bombed 9 times. They visited heavily bombed areas, sharing in their people's suffering, and forging an unbreakable bond of loyalty. The king who could barely speak became the voice of national resolve. The brothers, however, never recovered. Edward, now the Duke of Windsor, was effectively exiled. George VI was tormented by his brother's constant calls for more money, and eventually just stopped taking them. Later, the Duke's friendly associations with high-ranking Nazi officials would forever tarnish his reputation, cementing the image of a man who chose love not only over duty, but perhaps over his own country. The story of George VI is the ultimate triumph of the spare. A man who, through sheer will and a deep sense of duty, overcame his personal demons to become the king his nation needed. But his rise came from crisis, a pattern that echoes through the monarchy's history. Part 2. The Tudor Gamble, Henry VIII and Prince Arthur. Long before the Windsors, another second son was yanked from the shadows and into the blinding light of the throne, with consequences that would change the world forever. Prince Henry Tudor, born in 1491, was the original spare. He was never expected to rule. The future of the Tudor dynasty rested on his older brother, Arthur, Prince of Wales. Arthur was the great hope of their father, Henry VII, who had won the crown on the battlefield and was obsessed with securing his family's legitimacy. Arthur's life was meticulously planned. He was educated to be a king, and his marriage to the Spanish princess, Catherine of Aragon, was a huge diplomatic victory. Young Henry, meanwhile, was pointed toward a life in the church. He got a first-rate education, but was ultimately just an understudy. Then, in 1502, disaster. Just months after his wedding, Prince Arthur died, suddenly, at 15. The Tudor succession was thrown into chaos. In an instant, 10-year-old Henry was no longer the spare. He was the heir apparent. When his father died in 1509, the 17-year-old became King Henry VIII. One of his first acts was to marry his brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon, securing that critical Spanish alliance. In his youth, he was a true Renaissance prince, a talented musician, author, and athlete. But the ghost of his brother's duty to produce a male heir haunted him. His marriage to Catherine produced only one surviving child, a daughter, Mary. In an era where a female ruler was almost unthinkable, Henry became consumed by his great matter, the need for a son. His obsession, and the Pope's refusal to annul his marriage, led him down a path of shocking rebellion. Driven by desperation and his infatuation with Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII did the unthinkable. He used Parliament to sever England from the Roman Catholic Church, passing acts that made him the supreme head of the Church of England. It was a revolution. The spare who was supposed to join the church had, in his quest for an heir, torn down the very foundation of religious authority in his kingdom. His tyranny grew with his paranoia. 2 of his 6 wives were executed. He dissolved the monasteries, seizing their incredible wealth. The once perfect prince devolved into a lustful, egotistical, and tyrannical monarch. Henry VIII stands as a monumental testament to how a spare, suddenly burdened with the crown, can wield power with terrifying, nation-altering force. Before we get to our next story, why not subscribe? We explore the hidden histories and forgotten rivalries that define the world's most famous family. If you're enjoying this journey through the line of fire, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. Part 3. The Gilded Cage, Philippe I and Louis XIV. Across the Channel in France, another spare's life shows not the path to the throne, but a different kind of survival, the creation of a rival world. Philippe de France, born in 1640, was the younger brother of the magnificent Sun King, Louis XIV. Their father, Louis XIII, had been tormented for years by his own rebellious younger brother, Gaston. Determined to avoid a repeat, the court, led by the Queen Mother, Anne of Austria, engineered Philippe's childhood to neutralize him as a threat. They raised him to be effeminate, encouraging a love for dresses, jewels, and court gossip, while his brother Louis was groomed for absolute power. Philippe was essentially placed in a gilded cage, kept far from political influence. But this strategy of suppression backfired. Philippe proved to be a brilliant military commander. At the Battle of Cassel in 1677, he won a major victory against William of Orange. His success made him wildly popular with the people of Paris, but it also made his brother Louis deeply jealous. Louis allegedly gave his brother no further commands, ensuring the Spare would never again outshine the king on the battlefield. Blocked from politics and war, Philippe channeled his energy elsewhere. Through shrewd financial management, he became an incredibly wealthy man, building a lavish court at the Palais Royal that rivaled Versailles in its splendor and cultural influence. Though openly homosexual in an era where it was perilous, his royal status protected him, and he created a domain where he was the sun at its center. He founded a dynasty, a branch of the House of Orléans, whose descendants would eventually rule France. Philippe's story is a masterclass in how a Spare, denied power, can forge it for himself in other realms, creating a legacy that lasts for centuries. Part 4. The Martyr King, Charles I and Henry Frederick. While some Spares found power, Charles I's story had a far more tragic ending. Born in 1600, Charles was the second son of King James I, and, like Bertie centuries later, he was a sickly, overlooked child. He had a stammer and was small, living completely in the shadow of his older brother, Henry Frederick, Prince of Wales. Henry was everything Charles wasn't: strong, charismatic, and a militantly Protestant heir, adored by the people. Charles idolized his older brother, who seemed to treat him with a dose of bullying contempt. In one famous story, Henry snatched a bishop's hat, plopped it on young Charles's head, and mocked that when he was king, he'd make Charles the archbishop so the long robes could hide his ugly, rickety legs. Humiliated, Charles reportedly stamped on the hat and had to be dragged away in tears. But again, fate intervened. In 1612, the seemingly invincible Prince Henry died suddenly of typhoid fever at just 18 years old. The nation was stunned, and his quiet, 12-year-old brother Charles was now the heir. In 1625, he became King Charles I. But where his father had been a pragmatist, Charles was a man of rigid principles. He held a deep, unshakable belief in the divine right of kings, the idea that his authority came directly from God and couldn't be challenged by Parliament. This self-righteous ruler lacked the common touch and immediately clashed with his subjects. His problems were religion and money. His marriage to a French Catholic princess, Henrietta Maria, was deeply unpopular. He also believed he could levy taxes without Parliament's consent, a move his opponents saw as tyranny. His stubbornness left no room for compromise. He fought with Parliament relentlessly, eventually dissolving it and ruling alone for over a decade in what became known as the personal rule. This standoff couldn't last. A crisis in Scotland forced him to recall Parliament in 1640, but years of distrust had taken their toll. By 1642, the country had plunged into a brutal civil war, pitting the king's royalists against the Parliament's Roundheads. It was a fight for the very soul of the nation. Did power lie with the monarch or with the people? Charles was ultimately defeated and captured. Yet even then, he refused to accept a constitutional monarchy, believing it would betray God. In January 1649, he was tried, convicted, and executed for high treason. On a scaffold in Whitehall, the Spare, who was never meant to rule, was beheaded. The monarchy was abolished, and for 11 years, England was a republic. Charles I's story is a chilling warning. He was a man of deep religious conviction, but his inflexible nature and inability to compromise led directly to his own death and the temporary destruction of the very institution he was born to serve. Part 5. Thematic Analysis. The Curse of the Spare. The lives of George VI, Henry VIII, Philippe I, and Charles I, though centuries apart, reveal a brutal pattern. Being born a Spare means living a contradiction. You're royal, but you're not essential. This is the core of the spare's curse. It's a role that can destroy a person's sense of self. As Princess Margaret, Queen Elizabeth II's younger sister, once said after her father became king, "I used to be Margaret of York, and now I am nothing." This feeling of being irrelevant often breeds intense sibling rivalry. The heir is the focus of duty and expectation, while the spare is often left to find their own way. We see it in the bullying Charles I endured from his brother Henry. From that resentment, the spare faces a stark choice: loyalty or rebellion. Some, like Edward VIII, choose rebellion, choosing love over the crown and leaving behind a legacy of scandal and exile. Others, like France's Philippe I, rebel by creating a rival centre of gravity, building their own world when the main one excludes them. Then there's the path of the unexpected burden. For men like George VI and Charles I, the sudden death or abdication of an older brother changed everything overnight. Neither was prepared for the throne. George VI rose to the occasion with an immense sense of duty, becoming a beloved symbol of stability. Charles I, however, clung to a rigid ideology that led him straight to the executioner's block. Their stories show that the same twist of fate, a spare becoming king, can either save the monarchy or destroy it. Whether through rebellion or duty, the spare is a wild card whose choices can either reinforce the crown's stability or expose its deepest flaws. Part 6. The Prince and the Spare. A modern fracture. For decades, the public story of Prince William and Prince Harry was one of unity forged in tragedy. The loss of their mother, Princess Diana, created a bond that seemed unbreakable. William was the calm, dutiful heir. Harry was the charming, rebellious, and relatable spare. For years, the media cast Harry as the scandal-prone troublemaker, while William often avoided criticism. But their closeness was a cornerstone of the modern monarchy's appeal. That foundation, however, started cracking long before anyone knew. According to some royal experts, the first real fractures appeared not with Harry's exit from royal life, but during his relationship with Meghan Markle. William reportedly voiced concerns that the courtship was moving too fast, which angered Harry. Then, as Meghan became a target of intense media scrutiny, Harry's demands for her protection were reportedly met with institutional procedure. Harry felt his family, particularly his brother, wasn't backing him up. This sense of betrayal festered, spiraling into what one royal author described as Harry becoming paranoid, angry, and obsessive. For William, the path to the throne demands a steady focus, and the ongoing family drama was a distraction he couldn't afford. Reports suggest that while he was once deeply upset by the rift, he has since distanced himself, perhaps accepting that he has lost his brother. This modern split is often seen in a vacuum, a unique result of social media and tell-all memoirs. But the psychological weight of being the spare is a historical constant. In his own book, aptly titled Spare, Harry describes being brought into the world in case something happened to Willie. That feeling, of being a substitute, not an individual, is a psychological birthright for royal second children. It's the feeling of being the shadow, the supporting actor on a global stage. This frustration isn't unique to Harry. It's a powerful, recurring force that has driven some spares to exile, others to rebellion, and a select few, against all odds, to the throne itself. Conclusion and legacy. Looking back at the fractured brotherhood of William and Harry, we can see their story not as something new, but as the latest chapter in a centuries-old saga. The immense pressure, the weight of different duties, and the psychological split between the one who will rule and the one who won't. These are the historical forces that have pulled them apart. Prince Harry's choice to step away and write his own story is a modern echo of past rebellions. a search for purpose in a role that often denies one. It's a modern form of exile, a path also taken by Edward VIII. Prince William's steady focus on his duty as the future king mirrors the resolve of past heirs who had to put the institution before family. The history of the heir and the spare is the history of the monarchy itself. It's a story of stability and chaos, loyalty and betrayal, duty and freedom. The dynamic isn't just a family matter. It's a force that has shaped nations, toppled kings, and redefined the crown. The lives of these second sons, from the triumphant George VI to the tragic Charles I, from the revolutionary Henry VIII to the exiled Harry, are a powerful reminder that the line of succession is, and always has been, a line of fire. The question that lingers is, can the role of the spare survive in the 21st century? Or is this ancient rivalry a fatal flaw in the very idea of a monarchy? Which royal sibling rivalry do you find the most fascinating? Let us know in the comments below.